Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're talking about dealing with anxiety and depression. What's the difference between feeling sad and feeling depressed? How do we know when our anxiety is getting out of control? How can we help and support those we love going through this? Join us as we ask a counselor these and other questions related to this timely issue. Let's get started. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Marie.
Hi, Mindy.
Hey, Marie.
It's great to see you guys today. Today we're talking about signs and symptoms of anxiety and depression, as well as what we can do to recognize and get treatment for ourselves and our loved ones.
Even though it's a tough topic, I know sometimes we enjoy just dealing with lighthearted subjects and they're fun and all this. I'm thankful that we're going to tackle it, especially with someone who can give us some really great insight.
Yeah, I know it's affected our family personally. And even though we've kind of come through that, I think being in a season like we're in now can kind of maybe make it worse again. Or, it's something that's on my mind, like how are my family members coping now with this added burden?
Mm-hmm. Right. And listeners, we decided to bring in a guest today to share her wisdom with us. Tina Thompson is joining us. She's the author of Released, Setting Your Spirit Free from Anxiety and Depression. Tina is married and she's the mother of 2 married daughters. She lives in Lexington, Kentucky, and she loves sharing her story of victory over years of depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. Tina, thank you so much for joining us on Midlife Matters today.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes, we're so happy to hear from you today. And with all that's going on in the world and the levels of stress that we often live under, anxiety and depression always seem to be in the news and on the rise. We hear about it in adults, teenagers, and even children. And you've shared that you've struggled with anxiety and depression over the years. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
In my early 20s or mid-20s, I began having panic attacks. That was my first sign. And what a panic attack looks like, you can be leading a perfectly normal day, a perfectly normal life, and all of a sudden your heart starts beating fast. You feel like you have to just get up and run or race, or you just don't know what's going on. I went several times to the hospital thinking I'm going to have a heart attack in my young 20s. Now, you can have a heart attack in your 20s, but that's not likely to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So then starts the down spiral of depression. What's wrong with me? I'm abnormal. I'm not like other people. And then with depression comes along and I'm speaking of what happened to me, not wanting to get up in the morning, not wanting to do normal housework, not wanting to shower, not just, if I could just sleep all the time, then I didn't have to think. And that's kind of how it went for me. I went 8 years with this. At the point we were very poor. So I saved money up to go to one doctor and he just said, "Oh, women just do that." Well, that didn't help.
Yeah.
So that was not helpful. And so finally, God graciously gave me a Christian man whose wife had gone through severity of this. I told him my story, what was going on. I was having violent thoughts for myself, violent thoughts about my children. And he said, "Well, I would probably peg you manic depressive bipolar."
Mm.
And he said, but because he had happened to put his wife on so many medicines that at that point now, you have to remember, medicines have come a long way since then. He says, "Let's try to get you along first. And I want to meet you in 2 weeks. And within this time, and just that hope of the 2-week thing and then meeting me. He's like, and then we'll relook at medicines and stuff." So he began pointing out to me that there were some mental things I needed to deal with, some things I needed to look at, which was changing my focus. And so 8 years of that was way more than I wanted. I see now that God has used that in my life. I'm so thankful for it now. I know when I meet one-on-one with ladies who are going through depression or anxiety or many things, I call it biblical guidance. A lot of people call it biblical counseling. But I do this day in and day out at our church. I have an office at the church. I see it time and time again. And a lot of times if we can change our focus, which seems simple to say, but when you don't want to get up in the morning and you don't want to do anything, it's not as simple as it
sounds.
seems.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. It sounds like that was a painful period of your life that has now, you've been able to use that to help other people. Let's talk a little bit about what people listening may see in their own lives or the lives of people they love around them. I think one of the things that comes to mind first is, what's the difference between normal stress or just the blues and true anxiety and depression?
The normal stresses of everyday life, you can still function. You worry about finances, or you worry about your children, or you worry about, a friend or a spouse. You've got in an argument. You still function. You still go about the day. Anger arises. That depression, you tend to not, you're just kind of not there. It doesn't bother you anymore because you're just not there. You just want to sleep. You don't want to respond. You don't have the energy to respond to anger. You don't have the energy to respond to, I've got to get on up and go to work. That to me is the difference. And normal stresses of everyday life, we all have it. We all will have it. Mm-hmm. And depression tends to pull you away. That would be one thing I would look for in a family or member or friend, is someone who is pulling away from society, pulling away from you, and you know that nothing has happened particularly. It's one thing if you've had an argument, but if nothing has happened, they're pulling away from you. And I would look for that in a friend who's usually got her act together and all of a sudden everything is disheveled. That I would look for something like that too. Don't be afraid to ask them, what's going on? What's going on? Can I help you? And I will see this in women at church often, and I'll be able to go up to them and say, what's going on? And the tears just start flowing. And I love that, because then I know they're at their breaking point. That sounds terrible. But when you're at their breaking point, then you're willing to seek help. So many times we try not to seek help. I don't know why, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. We do try not to seek help. So we think we can get over on our own. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. There's no shame in asking for help.
Right.
How do you determine if the way that you're thinking is not normal? I think we can a lot of times justify our thoughts and think everybody thinks this way. How do we know when those thoughts aren't really rational or normal?
Well, I run it through the Philippians 4 test, Philippians 4:8. Is it true? And a lot of times it's not true, or I don't know if it's true. And so I can't dwell on that if I don't know that it's not true. Is it honorable? Well, probably not if I'm wanting to get back at someone, say it's an argument with someone. Is it praiseworthy? And like I said, it usually doesn't pass the first 2 or 3. And so then I can say, God, help me to stop this thinking. Help me here. And so that's just one practical way. The Bible also tells us that God is not does not give the spirit of fear. And so if I'm fearful about something, then I have to ask God, okay, I'm fearful and you're not giving me this spirit. What's going on? Am I putting something in my life that's holding too much space in my life that doesn't need to be there? And husbands and children can hold that space. In other words, am I making idols out of things that don't need to be idols? Or is this fear coming from the enemy? And I try not to give him too much credit, because I'm really good at being fearful on my own. So I know that God does not give me this spirit of fear. So where's it coming from? So it really comes back to looking at the root. Let's find the root. What's going on?
Yeah, I think something you just said is pretty profound, that I tend to think if I think it is true, but our thoughts aren't necessarily true.
Right. Good perception.
And we have to question those.
Yes. We're deceptive, and, we can deceive ourselves and we often do, because I'll perceive, just because I think something, then I begin to perceive that it's true, and it may not. And my husband's very good at pointing that out to me now. That sounds funny, but that's one of the biggest blessings that I've had, is somebody in my life who's willing to speak the truth to me. You're just because you perceive it doesn't mean it's true, he'll say. And it pulls me back into reality.
I love that you brought up and you called it the Philippians 4 test. I read a book years ago, and I don't think that we realize that training our mind is a lot like physically training our bodies, but you do have to train it. You have to work it. You have to, use self-control with it by running it through that test. And I don't agree with absolutely everything that this author talks about, but Joyce Meyer wrote a book called The Battlefield of the Mind. And I loved it because it talks about that Philippians 4 test. It talks about that particular verse of running everything through that. But I wanted to also ask you about the physical symptoms. We've talked about the mind, but I want to talk about the body also. Anxiety and depression, can it manifest as something physical, like stomach pain, headaches, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The doctors will tell you stress can cause ulcers. So there's your stomach.
Right.
There's a lot of stomach pains.
Okay.
I do have, just as a personal note, I have a lot of what's called GERD due
Right.
to the years of stress. And that's just something that you manage. The Bible talks about in Psalm several times. It talks about in Psalm 42:5, why are you downcast? So if I'm down, what's happening to my body? My shoulders slump, my countenance goes down, my smile leaves. I remember Paul in scripture said, God, please remove this thorn in my flesh. He says, it torments me day and night. And torment, you just feel tormented. And so with torment, raise your blood pressure, which when you have raised blood pressure creates headaches. And so, it's just physical. There are very definite physical things that happen. And I think a lot of times we don't seek medical help because we think, it'll be okay. And so some of these physical things you do need to go see a doctor for because it can be caused by stress, but it can be something underlying.
Right.
Well, Tina, in your years of talking with women, what are some unhealthy ways that you've seen women tend to cope with depression, anxiety, like on their own?
So I think the first thing that women do, or men, we run to people who sympathize with us. Now, that sounds silly. Of course, we want to sympathize with somebody who has depression, but we don't want to enable them and we don't want to cater to them. And that's what we tend to do.
What about somebody that doesn't run to anyone?
Yes, or that. Yeah, or we try to keep it to ourselves. And that's why I said, look for someone who's withdrawing. Look for somebody because that's the one person that if they're withdrawing, something's not right.
I would love your thoughts on where people can start to try to get help. It's so overwhelming to think, I have this huge burden. I'm afraid to tell people, or I've isolated myself. But how do you find or go about finding the right counselor or the right therapist when you're finally ready to seek help?
I tell my women, have you had a complete physical? Because there are physical things such as a thyroid problem that can be causing a lot of this. I had a girl just in the past 2 weeks who had a brain tumor. And so I'm like, please get a full physical first. Let's get a full physical, make sure there's nothing underlying that's happening. If you want Christian counseling, it's associations of certified Christian counselors. And you can go on that website and you can get resources, but you can also find a counselor in your area. The majority of them are free, which is amazing. Wow. And in the last probably 10 years is really just been biblical counseling. As a matter of fact, there was an article in the New York Times about 2 months ago. It said that doctors are now sending people back to biblical counseling. Up until 1967, your doctor would immediately say, if they couldn't find anything, blood work wrong or anything, they would say, you need to go to your pastor or your spiritual guide person. And then counseling, secular counseling became popular. Nothing against that. I think it's great. But now it's reversing again. You've got to get to the core problem. What is the root? Is there a sin? That could be a root. Is there pride? That could be a root. Is there anger? It could be a root. So you've got to get to the root of it and not just get counseling to make you feel better, because if you do it just to make you feel better, it's going to come back. Things are going to come back. So you've got to get to the root of the problem. What is my focus? What am I thinking on? What's happening to me? So you can go through ACBC and get biblical counseling. Ask your pastor, ask a woman Bible teacher that you've respected a lot. You'll be so surprised when you start asking people how many have dealt with this and have found someone that works for them and works well.
Mm-hmm. Well, just like it's so overwhelming for the person experiencing depression to get help, it can be overwhelming if you're watching your loved ones struggle with depression. And how do you go about supporting someone, whether it's your spouse or maybe your teenager, who is struggling with depression and anxiety? I think the temptation is that we want to try and fix them or kind of like give up therapy ourselves. But what can we do?
Several things. Again, I would not enable them and don't cater to them, because then what happens to those who are in depression and anxiety, we get really self-focused. And so if it's working for us, in other words, if you're walking on eggshells around me, then I later can use that for my benefit. Are we doing that to be evil? We're really not. It's the human nature in us. And so I would say speak truth in love. In other words, there might be time when you have to say hard things. Okay, well, you've acted like this for 10 days. It's time to, the commercials will say, if you're like this for 2 weeks, then you need help. That's not necessarily true. Often we can be stressed for 2 weeks, Try to ask them, ask them, is there any way do you want to talk to me? Is there any way I can help you? What needs to go on? And that'll give you a clue too with what they say. If there's any way I can help you and it always becomes about them, then that would be a clue that we've got to change their focus. I think of a teenager, let's get them out. Let's get them serving others. Same thing with your spouse. Let's get them out. Let's get them serving others. Let's change the focus. If it's a teenager, find a good child therapist. Ask their youth pastor to take time with them.
I want to make sure that the people that might be listening right now, that maybe they don't personally struggle with depression or anxiety, but they have a family member in their home, it might be really easy to feel like you have to carry the burden of your family member or your child that is struggling with depression or anxiety. At what point do you say that's too much? I'm not qualified. Like, this is too big for me. How do you know the difference? Is this just a bad season? How do we know where to draw the line? When is it just something that we know is going to pass in a couple of days? When do you need to help kind of turn that person over to somebody else?
It's hard to answer in a blanket statement because every situation is so different. Some people can handle it lasting for several days or weeks or months, and some people can't. Mm-hmm. And so, you know your family, your body, your friends, and when it's weighing on you so heavily, if it's becoming where you're becoming depressed and you can't handle it anymore, again, I would say ask that person. Is there a way I can help? Is there something that I can do? And a lot of times they'll know. And if it doesn't work, then say, okay, this is not working. Let's look at something. Let's look at some other area.
I know I had a teen in my household that suffered from depression. And I know I felt a lot of guilt afterwards that I missed signs, that I didn't see it coming sooner. And so I struggled with that. And then after he kind of came out of it, I know it was an all-consuming thought in our house between my husband and I. Like, everything was, how's he doing? It was kind of a report every day. And I would go to my son and say, what's wrong? How are you doing? And if he said, I'm tired, because tired was something he said when he was depressed, or if he slept in, or if he was kind of in his room a lot, and he finally said, Mom, this is just regular old tired. Like, we had to kind of come to an agreement where you have to communicate with me so that I'm not asking you every time I see something that alarms me. It really did change our whole household for that time period. And I did kind of feel like I was carrying it all and checking up on him.
Well, I think as parents, we have a lot more control over maybe when we urge our teen or our child to get help, or even just flat out go and make an appointment for them, than we would, say, our spouse, and definitely a friend. Like a friend, we might be able to urge or suggest. A spouse, we could probably a little more forcefully urge. But a child or a teenager, we may just have to make the appointment if it's gotten to the point where we're that concerned. And maybe they'll go and get something out of it, and maybe they won't, but we need to maybe start the process. They may not understand how helpful it would be, and they may not ask.
Right. I did have a teenager last year, and she was acting out in all ways, shape, or form, and her dad did make her appointment.
What are some signs maybe to look out for in your teenager or spouse?
Yeah. And I think you actually mentioned a couple yourself. He would go in his room. He was tired. He would withdraw. Withdrawal is a big thing. Doesn't want to associate around other people. Find themselves not doing their normal chores or the things they used to, even with their friends. With teens, it's really, you'll see them withdrawing from their friends and from their normal friends and going towards friends who maybe will help them to act out. That's a clue. But most of the time it's withdrawal.
Yeah, that was true for us.
Yeah.
Tina, many times I'm surprised to hear, like, when a friend is struggling with depression, on the outside, it looks like they're successful. They have great lives. And so is it common then for that person to possibly struggle? In other words, does depression always look like the sad TV commercials that we see?
Yeah, no, it doesn't look like the sad commercials. As a matter of fact, none of you would have known anything was wrong with me. I think I wrote this in my book that I would go to church and put a smile on my face, and inside I'm looking at each person. I really was like, could you see it? Help me. Can you please help me? I was just screaming inside, help me, help me, help me. And unfortunately, a lot of times when I did reach out, I told you about the doctor I reached out to. I reached out to a former pastor at the time and said, here's what's happening to me. I told him the worst thoughts I'd been having, and he said, oh, go read 1 John. Well, that didn't help either.
So not helpful.
Yeah, right. Because at that point, at some points in depression, you can't concentrate very well. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, you're not likely to see a friend who's going through it. And you can't feel guilty once you find out, because they have to be willing to say what's going on. They have to be willing to tell it. But yeah, we don't always know. And yeah, we're always shocked because they seem fine. I mean, people would have thought I was fine on the outside, but I wasn't. Right. And until they're willing to say, I need help, there's really, as a friend, not much you can do.
Yeah. Right. Well, I'm thinking of like, sometimes we're urged to like count our blessings or look around at all the ways that you should be thankful. And what do you say to the woman who might be feeling guilty for feeling depressed or anxious?
I say don't feel guilty, because God tells us we're going to. In scriptures, David talked about, in my distress, I called on you. So the scripture talks about people being distressed and struggling, and we know that's going to happen. So we shouldn't feel guilty. It doesn't make us less of a person. It doesn't mean God loves us less. It's not a bad thing. There's nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with going through depression. I love that now it's not so bad to talk about. When I went through it so many years ago, my fear was that they would take my children away. Right. Because I'm like, oh, they're going to think I'm an unfit mother, especially with the thoughts I was having. And so I didn't want to tell anybody. And again, I didn't want people to think I didn't have my act together. I didn't want people to think, I thought, oh, you're not going to like me if you know I went through depression.
I love that you mentioned that, because there was such a stigma about mental health in general. And I know that I struggled with postpartum depression the first year after my oldest child was born, but I didn't know that that's what it was until the cloud lifted. Until I was out of it, was I able to look back, realize I wasn't myself. And during that time, I remember feeling like there's no way I could have put it into words what I was struggling with. And I wished I would have been able to. I love that more women are coming out and talking about postpartum depression, because I remember thinking to myself, I have everything I wanted. Like, I've got this beautiful newborn girl sitting in my lap, and why am I just so hopeless about the future? But I love that women are coming out and talking more about that particular time, because it doesn't define you to struggle with that. Just to be aware of some of these things, and that maybe it's seasonal, maybe it's hormonal, that you said, there could be an issue going on.
One thing that a nurse, she worked at a mental hospital, told me, she knew me well enough to know the thoughts I was having. That was one thing she said to me, these thoughts, they're thoughts. It doesn't mean that's who you are. It doesn't mean you'll act on them. They're thoughts. Thoughts can be taken care of. And that was just eye-opening to me, that, okay, they're thoughts. That thought doesn't mean that's who you are. Mm-hmm. As some people feel guilty because they do have to take medication. I said, that's your Jesus pill. If you have to take this medication, then to me, it tells me I'm not in control. God is, and he provided that. And so they shouldn't feel ashamed of that either. So God graciously allowed me not to have to be on medicines, but I'm not saying I'll never have to be. I don't know. And so I don't want people to feel guilty for that too. We want to make sure that that's out there too.
Yeah, I love something you said in your book, that it was helpful for you to always remember that I was not crazy, but my thoughts were.
Yes, right.
That separation of thoughts and who you really are.
Yes, right. Yeah. And that just goes to show you our thoughts can control us, but they don't have to.
Well, let's talk about what we're going through right now, the coronavirus quarantine. What encouragement can you give us during this time if we're struggling with depression and anxiety?
Yeah, I think to know that this too shall pass. This kind of thing, actually, this sounds crazy, but things like this keep you going. So a depressed person sometimes won't be as depressed when there's things like this, because it's taken their focus off of it. So you'll be surprised when you see, someone who is depressed, but yet during this time, because things are different, they're having to refunction and refigure out. A lot of people who typically aren't depressed will become depressed because we hate change. We do not like change. And everything is changing, right? And we don't know. We keep saying it'll get back to normal in a few months. There might be some things that are not back to normal as we saw it before. And change is okay. Change is okay. It's okay to feel that way, but it's also okay to adapt. Don't allow yourself to dwell on it. Don't watch the news 24/7.
Amen.
There's one thing I learned that I can now, but I could not when I was going through depression. I couldn't watch the news because I would start panic about everything what was going on. Do creative things, especially those of you with kids. Our youth group has actually went and mowed some of our elderly lawns because they can't get out. They've gone to go to the grocery for somebody. You don't even have to buy it for them. I have a 93-year-old mother-in-law, and she'll call and say, I need this at the grocery store. Okay, I'll be glad to go get that for you. So think about people who might need some encouragement, and that way you're not dwelling on this. This is a time for me to encourage. I actually have time now. I don't have to go to work. I have time. I can encourage someone. We have a neighborhood here they've drawn circles in their yard, and they're 6 feet apart. So once a week they're having what they call happy hour, and it's just happy hour where they get to see each other. So the circles are 6 foot apart, and so it's so cute. It's cute. Just do some fun things like that. Zoom, where we can, like we're talking now, you can see each other. Don't not see each other. There's a thing called House Party. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's an app, and you actually see each other and play games. And so you can play Yahtzee, you can play trivia, you can play Pictionary, and it's so fun. So, you have to stay connected. We have to stay connected because that will pull you down more than anything is not being connected.
I love it. Thank you for saying that. So Tina, are there different types of depression? Are there depressions related to circumstances, physical imbalances, different seasons of life? We've even had a menopause episode where we joked about that's like adult puberty, spiritual, emotional, kind of, what would you say to that, the different types that are out there?
Yeah, I think obviously circumstances can throw you into different things. It can be just stress or it can be worrisome. I think hormones can throw you into grumpiness or, there is depression, which takes you down. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a circumstance. That you have no clue most of the time, why am I depressed? You can't even put a finger on it. I kept thinking, what's wrong with me? Everything's fine. I think, like you said, with your postpartum, everything seemed fine. What is wrong? You just can't put a finger on it. And so I think there is depression that you can't put a finger on. I think there are circumstantial depressions, such as maybe a spouse has left you. I had a spouse left after 32 years. No reason, just got tired of being married, And so obviously she's going to be depressed for a while. It's a depression, but it's a circumstantial, may not last forever. And you really just have to look at each case and say, do I need more help in this? Each circumstance is different, but there are different types. Yeah.
Well, there are so many facets to depression and so many that we've covered today. Like we said before, everybody has unique situations. And so even listening to something like this podcast, there's probably something unique about your particular situation that you're thinking, and we probably haven't even covered it. So I hope that listeners will seek out their medical providers. They will seek out other people in their lives that may have good recommendations. Can you tell people where they could find you if they wanted to read more of what you've written?
Yeah, my book is on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. And I do have a website, Tina Thompson at releasedministries.com, if they wanted to email me or talk to me. And there's no way we could cover everything, here. And you're right, everybody is so unique and have different things. I do know that God is seeking him as the answer. If I wanted to challenge you to do something, I'd say go read Psalm 139 and write everything it says about you. Everything, because God says he knitted you in your mother's womb. And that means that's hands-on. You don't knit without your hands. Purposely knitted you in your mother's womb. And then he says he knows plans for you in Jeremiah. So you're on purpose. No matter what someone has told you, you have a purpose and you're on purpose.
Yeah, that's a great word of wisdom, Tina. Thank you so much. All right. Well, Tina, thank you for sharing this. We're going to move to a little lighter segment of our show now. We're going to move to I'm a Fan. And Tina, you're our guest, so we always ask our guests first, what are you a fan of this week in your life?
This is an egg boiler.
Oh,
I'm not
okay.
typically a fan of one appliance that does one thing. It's one-use appliances. This truly does the job like it's supposed to do. So it boils your eggs. You can poach your eggs or whatever. They're always perfect, and they peel perfectly, which is bizarre. So when I did them in a pan, sometimes they would crack open. They would
Right.
These never crack open. They always peel perfectly. It's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. This is my favorite little product, my newest little product that somebody sent me and said, I'm telling you, this will rock your world. And I eat boiled eggs almost daily. Yes, it has.
That's cool.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah. So what is the name of that product?
DASH is Dash. So that's the brand. And it looks like a large egg is what it looks like. And I know you can get it on Amazon.
Listeners, we will put a link to that in our show notes. Mindy, what are you a fan of this week?
All right. I am a huge fan of the spring weather. And I say that because as we're recording, our yard is getting mowed for the first time of the year. This is just such a major milestone for us with the trees blooming. And I have a tree line behind my house. I've been sitting on my deck every day, and it just helps so much, especially in the season of quarantining from basically everything that I was doing. Go outside, smell the grass that was freshly cut, see the tree line turning green again, bringing color back to the earth. It makes me feel so much better.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
It's very nice. I planted some flowers this weekend, and even that just was so enjoyable just to see something new and pretty outside.
yes,
Yeah.
it's therapeutic even to pull weeds out of the beds in the front of the house. So spring, thank you for coming finally.
Yes. Julie, what are you a fan of this week?
Okay, during this quarantine, I don't have children at home, so I am searching for things to do. I love yard work, so I wanted to mulch. I pulled my weeds and I wanted to mulch, but with the nurseries being closed, I thought, it's just so frustrating that I can't use this time. So we decided to go with pine straw mulch this year based on a recommendation from a landscaper. And John got on Amazon and we ordered these big boxes of pine straw mulch. And they came yesterday. So that's what I've been doing. And they're probably in a box that's 3 by 3 square.
Okay.
And it is just packed in there. It covers 300 square feet each box when you pull it all out. So we have put down the 4 boxes and we've ordered 4 more. So it's kind of fun that this project can still keep going on even when all the nurseries are closed and we're not supposed to be visiting them anyway. So that's kind of been a lifesaver for me.
Oh, well, that's great.
So cool.
Good. That's
Julie,
good to know.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm actually searching for places that have flowers and shrubs available. I know Costco does. That's one of the few places, but that's so cool. You found that on Amazon.
Well, it seems like we have a bit of a spring theme going on for I'm a Fan this week. Since none of us can really be out shopping, Amazon is the place to go. So I wanted to have some new outdoor pillows for my porch swing. I have a lot of indoor pillows that, they usually end up getting just pushed to the ground if you have too many for your couch or your bed. And so I thought, man, I hate to buy more pillows. So I ended up ordering some waterproof pillow covers that fit my indoor pillows off Amazon, and I'll put a link to them in the show notes. And now I feel like I can use them outside. And if I decide I want to bring them back in, I can do that too.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, it was a 2-pack and they were very reasonable. It was 2 for $14, which, that's super reasonable.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go. I've got some stuff to look for on Amazon right now.
And listeners, if you want links to any of the things that we've talked about today, we will have those in our show notes, and you can either find those on our website at midlifematterspodcast.com, or you can go to your email and email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. Just write show notes in the subject line, and we will start sending you them weekly. You'll be able to listen to the podcast right from your email, and you'll have all the links of things that we talk about. In this week's show notes, we'll also include a link to Tina's book and where you can find her on the internet. So we're so happy that you joined us today, Tina. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I know this is such a timely subject, and I hope that listeners will be helped by it.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Thanks for coming on.
Yes, loved having you today. Thanks,
Thank
Tina.
you. Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you guys next week.
Sounds great.
All right. Bye.
Bye, girl.
We're so happy you joined us today. If you'd like to get the show notes for today's episode, please email your name and address to midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com and write show notes in the subject line. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.